Today we're going to be talking about two topics that are near and dear to my heart, cyber attacks and Linux. So after this thing, come on up, tell me your favorite Linux distro. If it's Gentoo, I'll have questions for you, but really want to talk to you about what you guys like. Like Linda mentioned, back in the end of November, a researcher discovered this vulnerability in the React JavaScript framework. Within a few days, we started seeing mass exploitation of this, so we'll dive on in. And Linda, kindly introduce me so we can skip that. All right, so before we dive in, the things that I'm going to be talking to you about today come from two talks that were given before. So my colleagues, Anna Pham, who is a senior hunt and response analyst, Craig, who's a principal detection engineer, Michael, who's a senior hunt response analyst, and our friends over at Grey Noise, Bob, gave a talk on Tradecraft Tuesday a couple of weeks ago. It's about an hour long. It goes even farther in depth than I will today. Today's a 15-minute whistle-stop tour, but that's up on YouTube. We also have a blog on this that Anna, Craig, and Michael wrote too. That's also goes fully in depth. So don't need to bother taking notes today. Just come check these out on our blog and the YouTube, and we can follow along. All right, so let's start at the top. What is CVE-2025-55182? It's got a catchy name. There'll be a quiz at the end of this thing on what that is. Basically what it is a vulnerability in the React framework. It's a JavaScript framework. It's really popular. It powers 7% of all websites on the internet. And you might be thinking, Chris, 7%, that's not a lot, but like my colleague Michael said, think about 7% of every JavaScript-based website on the internet. That's a ton of websites. That's millions of websites. The second thing about this vulnerability is it got a 10 out of 10 on the CVSS score. It's the worst possible score you can get. It means it's an incredibly dangerous vulnerability. There's no authentication needed. And once it's exploited, you can get direct shell access, which is a bad day for defenders. And then the last thing, it's just there's no auth needed. It's remotely exploitable. It's not a fun one. So on the left here, we've got the CEO of Vercel, who is a big contributor to React, and he posted this proof of concept exploit on the internet. And this kind of gets to the core of what this exploit is. And so right here under this for, we have this prefix stanza. And even though it's just a basic console.log JavaScript here, what that does is it's a deserialization bug. So whenever a threat actor sends a crafted packet to a React server, it will run whatever arbitrary code is in that line. And the double slashes at the end prevent the legitimate code after from running. It's basically like a JavaScript comment character //. And so the threat actor can run whatever code they want at that point and get shell access. So let's take a peek at what that looks like. And so this is kind of where we started seeing some of that initial poking, those raptors at the fences. Once they sent that initial packet, we started seeing all these different commands come through. So they got shell access. So the first command we saw them run is this weird math command. Echo is the Unix Linux command for printing something to the command line, and they would just put a math command. If that returned with a number, that told the threat actor, I'm in. So they just used this as a check to see if they got in. The second is similar. They would echo out this vuln test 123456, and they would pipe it through base 64. W0 means don't word wrap. And what they're doing is, again, they're checking, did my shell command run? And does this computer have base 64 so they could encode and decode some of their payloads? So they were checking what's on the system. The next one down is even weirder. They said ver or ID, the double pipe being the or command. Version is a Windows PowerShell command, and ID is a Unix command. Both determine what's on the operating system. So they put both on the system. If version ran, they knew it was Windows. If the ver command failed or didn't exist, it would go to ID, meaning it's a Linux system or a Mac system. And so that would tell the threat actor where they landed. So now we're seeing automated tooling. This is them just throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks and seeing where they can get. The last command is even weirder. It's a command.exe process in Windows, but then inside of that, they were trying to execute wget. They were trying to hide as vim, which is a command line editor. They're running nohup to hide it, piping it through dev null, and then trying to rmrf that. none of those commands would work on the traditional Windows machine. So they're just kind of throwing everything at the wall here to see what sticks. So again, kind of indicative of automated tooling at scale, and just seeing what happens here. So now we know that they have shell access. You might be thinking, all right, how does this apply to me? And so what? Why should I care? And both of those would be two good questions. So let's take a peek and see where they went with this. So post-exploitation, we saw these threat actors dropping a number of different malware families on these machines. Not all of them were present at the same time, but over time we saw individual and combinations of these. The first thing we saw them drop was XMRig crypto miners. So they got in, started dropping their crypto miner and started at least attempting to mine it. Thankfully, we were able to catch that a little early. The second one is a little weirder, which is this PeerBlight malware. It's a Linux backdoor, and what this backdoor does is it tries to set up a C2 communication using a hard-coded IP address. It's like 185. We saw it in the slide a minute ago. And so as a defender, it's really easy to play whack-a-mole with one IP address. And so the threat actor had planned for this. So if you're able to determine that C2 path, you can block it at your firewall, you can prevent it at your network devices. So they had this domain generation algorithm that came next. So it used a Mersenne twisting to get random words. So it's two words as like a noun and a verb. And then they would use the date as the seed. So it's pseudo-random. So if you know the date the threat actor used to create those domains, you would always get the same 200 word list. And so you'd be able to predict. And so you could just guess at the dates the threat actor wanted and you could get that same list. So they took that into account too. They said, all right, the defender's got my first IP. Now they have all 200 of my random domains. And then the third thing they did is created this distributed hash table. And it's what BitTorrent uses. It's the same thing that you like peer-to-peer BitTorrenting networks. And so they would send the C2 communications to all peers in a BitTorrent network. And that's way harder to kill. That's way harder to block. And they would use that as their final C2 method. And so that's where peer and PeerBlight comes from, that P2 communications. The next is CowTunnel. Cow was a string that they used inside the malware, and that was basically a reverse proxy. And the idea being is when you're in certain environments, like a natted environment, they allow traffic out, but traffic in is a little more difficult. It requires port forwarding or a direct rule. So this reverse proxy allows the threat actor to communicate directly to the box. The last is Zinfolk or Zinfolk. Forgive me for the name, but this is another implant that we saw in Linux. This had reverse shells, so the TA was able to have the infected machine communicate back out through their host. It had a SOX 5 proxy so that they could come out from the different infected machines and you wouldn't be able to see their infrastructure. And they had some anti-forensics capabilities, particularly timestamping. So what the TA would do is anytime malware would drop, they would change the timestamps on the compiled malware. I think that was a Golang binary. And then the last thing we saw is just commodity malware, commodity frameworks. Sliver, it's a free and open source red team framework you can download on GitHub. So we saw them trying to drop those Sliver payloads. With those Sliver payloads came a persistence mechanism. That persistence mechanism came in the form of these processes that looked like regular system daemons. So libsystemd, polkit, auditd, setispatch, these look like legitimate things, but they were processes that were renamed. The second thing they did is they dumped both an upstart and a systemd service at the same time. You wouldn't find both of those on the same system. The top one is most modern Linuxes run systemd. The bottom is the older style. And you can see they gave these lame names to them like system daemon. Like that doesn't exist. It looks legitimate. So if you're looking quickly through your systemd stuff, you're not going to think that's suspicious, but that doesn't exist normally. So these are some of those persistence mechanisms that they were able to use to stay on the system there. And so with that, we started our work of kicking them out of the system, trying to figure out where these were hidden and help us. So thankfully this wasn't super widespread. We saw about tens of thousands of attacks initially, and then over time it started dying down.